Up until the last century, cultural attrition of teeth used to weave fibers or tan skins could still be seen in some ethnic groups. To weave their nets, fishermen of Atlit Yam relied on fiber. These types of remains are amongst the most difficult for an archaeologist to establish. But researchers in Atlit Yam were lucky enough to find carbonized plant fibers still clearly identifiable after 9,000 years. Flax fiber, for instance, could be used for ropes, nets, and maybe even clothing. Such organic remains, as well as charcoal or bones, can be used to obtain precise data that provides further details on the evolution of ancient settlements. The clock used here is an unstable form of carbon that decays in a known and regular pattern, carbon-14.
What you see? This is a bone very well preserved of a small mammal, probably a mouse. So this picking has to be done very carefully and you get a lot of information.
Apart from hand collecting material from the surface of the site and excavating inside the wells, and in that sediment we found animal bones which we wouldn't have collected from the sea floor without the dredger. It's one of the first sites where we have almost the full complement of domestic animals, which means sheep, goat, cattle, pig, so that we can see within the site the complete, if you like, development of domestic animals, beginning with animals that are wild and hunted, through to animals that are fully domesticated. And so we have one of the more impressive pieces, which is a horn core, a horn of cattle, and this is probably wild cattle, what we call an auroch. So this is from before animals were domesticated. Also from the surface of the site are horn cores of goats. And this would have been a wild goat or a very, very primitive goat. We can compare it here, and you can see that the horn core is very straight and leaves the skull right above the front of the eyes, as opposed to a domestic goat. You can see that the horn cores go backwards, and they also have a twist. So what we're dealing here is really one of the earliest points in the domestication of goats. When we look at the material from the wells, we're dealing with the end of the site. It's a later phase of occupation. And essentially, the material that we find there in terms of animals is slightly different. All the animals in the wells are domestic. We see the transition within the site, and that is a unique feature.
Pollen and seeds extracted from the sediments also reflect the agricultural transition and give an idea of the vegetation and climate that was the norm here in prehistoric time. The average temperature was 3 degrees lower than today, with greater differences between the seasons and colder seawater. Once they reached the bottom of the well, the archaeologists had enough clues to reconstitute the sequence of events that forced it to be abandoned. With the sea rising, salt water percolated up through the sand and contaminated the freshwater table under the well.
It's very hard to abandon your house, to abandon your village, so naturally we assume that they struggled, they tried to solve problems. And actually we found evidence in the well of trying to cope with the problems.
Those who had spent so much effort building it tried to restore its function by raising its base, in vain.
The sea was so close, so the well was no use anymore. So at that moment, they still used it, but as a garbage pit.
The sea level kept rising slowly, but inexorably. One wonders, where did the water come from? It came from ice. When ice keeps piling up on continents, the world's sea level goes down. In the days of Atlit Yam, the melting phase of the last ice age was well underway. But North America was still covered by the most imposing of the ancient ice giants. Glaciers have left behind deep scars in the granite of the north shore of the St. Lawrence River in Quebec. They are vivid evidence of the scope of the planetary upheaval that had repercussions on early civilizations settled near shores. At the rate of 0.5 meter per century, the rising sea eventually forced the people of Atlit Yam to abandon the land of their ancestors. The Canadian glacier would keep feeding the sea until the Bronze Age some 3,000 years later. To date, on the abandoned site, researchers have identified over 70 structures of various functionalities and dwellings with rectangular foundations, of which only the first row of stones remain.
At that time, during the pre-pottery Neolithic period, people used to bury their dead underneath the living floor, which is very interesting if you come to think about it. The notion of the idea of separating the world of the dead and the world of the living is quite a late notion. So in Neolithic site, it is quite easy to find human skeleton because once you find the structure, you know for sure underneath the floor you will find human skeleton.
The graves at Atlit Yam didn't contain only bones. Sealed in the anaerobic environment of clay for thousands of years, these remains present the best preserved human and viral DNA samples of prehistory.
Good morning, everyone. Today is going to be a bit of a charge day. First thing, Jonathan, is the first safety.
Ehud told me about 2 minutes before I went diving that we were going to start to excavate the new well, the feature number 80, which he just discovered this year.
Every dive over Atlit Yam brings about its share of discovery. This new structure, spotted during the mission preparation, may turn out to be a well, a storage pit, or a burial site. Despite the risk and the long hours spent underwater, diving is a passion for underwater archaeologists. That does not relieve them from the tedious monk work generally associated with classic archaeology.
Fait que présentement, on est en train de trier le matériel organique qu'on a trouvé ce matin. Fait que là, on est dans l'argile pour vraiment aller chercher le matériel organique.
Oh. Okay, so we will use this.
No.
Okay, a piece of wood? Yeah.
No.
Piece of glass? Boom. Boom.
This is a bone tool. This is a spatula from the 20 centimeters in the well. So this is the first tool we have.
Completely round.
C'est super!
Final material we put here, and the organic material we put there.
Another part of it.
You gotta hold
Make sure that you don't break it while doing it. You have to fill it by. There is a high probability that it is the same artifact. It was broken in antiquity and maybe dumped. You see? This is the spatula, and believe me, I didn't dive here the last night and put it there. You have to trust me. Caroline, you are the lucky one.
Yes!
The most important chapter of prehistory is surely the period that sees nomadic hunter-gatherer tribes switching to a brand new mode of subsistence: agriculture. Of the thousands of plant seeds found, there were many kilograms of domesticated wheat, but also barley, lentils, and chickpeas. In the beginning, the inhabitants must have gathered wild grains as a hedge against periods of want. But the process of harvesting and planting in the same area slowly altered the plant characteristics, domesticating them. Probably without intent, the early prehistoric farmers were busy fostering hybrids and artificial selection on their seeds.
These are sickle blades. See the shine? You see that there is a glossy here at the edge. This is the original shine created by cutting wheat. So it stays like this, and you can still see the polish after 9,000 years.
Thus, the small community can feed itself and prosper all year long. So much so that life expectancy in Atlit Yam gets a significant boost. At the beginning of the summer, a decline in fishing activity makes way for grain harvest, followed by the slaughtering of animals born in the spring. The group then moves on to fruit and nut gathering, before a fall seafood phase, followed by the collection of wild legumes in winter. As the year passes, the inhabitants sow grain, then take to the sea, fishing once again. In all practical senses, Dr. Hershkowitz's lab has conducted an autopsy on all human remains excavated in Atlit Yam.
The information is coded in the bone, like a huge tape recorder that records almost every event in your life, and you just need to know how to read the information in the bone. If you take a femur of a male and a female, each knows just that one is longer than the other. It makes sense.
Bone growth, pelvic bone articulations, long bone fine structure, tooth attrition are all clues to determine age, sex, and general health of individuals. Combining all the factors allows us to conclude that few children reached adulthood.
And this was at the late 19. Udi entered to the water and he found some skeleton and he called me, and then we took the next day. When I arrived, I looked around and I saw there is another skull of a baby. As in the bones, you can see that he suffered from some infectional disease.
Bacterial DNA and bone analysis have established the oldest cases of malaria and tuberculosis, which took the lives of this mother and her young child.